So, guys, today we'll be talking about the new topic, and the topic is the last topic of our chapter, which is all about the disease or the disorders which are related with the respiratory system or our breathing system. So, let us begin. Telling you over here, some diseases are pathogen borne. That means they are because of any kind of bacteria or viruses. Some are induced. Induced means something because of smoking or pollution or something like that. So let us go in detail with this disease. So here we'll be talking about three main disease for the board students, that is asthma, emphysema, and occupational respiratory disorders. For NEET, extra diseases which has to be studied is bronchitis, TB, that is tuberculosis, and the last one is cystic fibrosis. So the first one is we are going to talk about is asthma. Uh, Talking about asthma, it is an allergic disorder. So it is caused by generally those agents which cause allergy are called allergen. They're mainly aerial pollutants. If somebody is smoking a lot, cigars and etc. things, it can cause asthma. And aerial allergen like pollen grains, dust particles can cause asthma. The symptoms is inflammations of bronchi and bronchioles. So you can see in the diagram, this is a normal bronchi, whereas in asthma, what happens? The bronchial tube get inflamed, and because of this narrow diameter of the bronchiole, the oxygen supply decreases, and hence this results into difficulty in breathing. So the person suffering, the patient will have difficulty in breathing. Now, how one can analyze this asthma? Like, no doubt from symptoms one can analyze, but when we go for a blood check, or we can say when we go for a hematological report, hematology, that is study of blood, one will find in the blood clinical findings as basophil and eosinophil increases. Okay, basophil and eosinophil, we all know that they are responsible for allergic response. One increases the allergy like basophil, whereas the another one, eosinophil, will try to suppress the allergy. So there is a tug of war between the two cells, and hence both the cells increases. And antibody E, which is also known as immunoglobulin E, which is particular for allergy, will increase as well. And for the treatment, basically it is incurable, but for the treatment, you can go with the tracheal dilatory drugs. So that can temporarily dilate, that is broaden your trachea, or you can say your bronchial tree, so that whatever swollen bronchi are there, that may regain a bit of elasticity. And other things which is given, as it is an allergy, other thing which is given is antihistamine drugs, because basophil release histamine. To suppress those histamines, antihistamine drugs are given. So this is about the first disease, asthma. The second disease is known as emphysema. We are going to talk about is emphysema. You can see what happens in emphysema is like this is a normal alveoli. In the patient with emphysema, the alveoli gets damaged and loses its elasticity, right? Generally, if you talk normally about our alveoli, they are having an elastic structure. Means what? They're exactly something like balloon. But in emphysema, that elasticity of alveoli is lost. So they really become fragile, and they are more prone to break, or we can say as they lose their elasticity, they do not expand. And the causes are cigarette smoking, then pollutants, then bacterial infections. Symptoms includes, as I've already told you, that the alveolar wall are damaged, or remember that they lose their elasticity. This is the best word to be remember. And there is a difficulty in breathing. And this is a chronic disorder which you cannot cure, so it goes incurable. The next disorders is occupational respiratory disorders. The simple is the disorders, the respiratory disorders which are because of a particular occupation or a job or a profession. Here we call it as the occupational respiratory disorders. Like it is generally because of working in certain kind of industries, like where lot of dust particles or tiny particles involved, that that involves like grinding of stones, breaking of stones like quarries, or you can say some fabric industries, in which tiny size particles may enter your respiratory system, and so the body cannot fully cope up with the situation. So we can say that in this situation, the body is unable to bear those small particles in the lungs, and that develops respiratory disorders. So here you can say that long exposure give rise to inflammation leading to fibrosis. We will see what fibrosis is, which is known as cystic fibrosis. So here it results into the extension or multiplication of fibrous tissues that is present in the lungs, and it causes a lung damage. The example of occupational lung disorders, or you can say occupational respiratory disorders, are silicosis and asbestosis. Generally, how one can protect this? Wearing protective mask, one can protect themselves from such occupational respiratory disorders. Next topic is all about bronchitis. Bronchitis, bronchi, and tis. Wherever the word comes tis, it means that it is inflammation. Inflammation means swelling, right? So when does our bronchi get swollen? Again, the reason can be cigarette smoking, it can be pollutants, and it can be a bacterial infection. Now we can see in the diagram the enlarged view of a normal bronchi. Here you can see that. Whereas in bronchitis, that is inflammation, that is swelling of bronchi, the diameter of the bronchi decreases and it releases extensive mucus. So the symptoms are cough, production of mucus, that is mucus excessive is produced. It can be white or it can be gray or sometimes red because it may have a streak of blood with that. It causes fatigue, tiresomeness, shortness of breath, which is also called as dyspnea, and slight fever and chills and chest discomfort. Let me tell you that bronchitis at its initial stages वो क्योर हो सकता है, लेकिन अगर वो ज्यादा बढ़ जाता है तो ब्रोंकाइटिस रिजल्ट्स इनटू अ क्रोनिक कंडीशन. तो पहले एक्यूट होता है. एक्यूट मतलब क्या, कि जिसे हम क्योर कर सकते हैं, लेकिन क्रोनिक का मतलब ऐसा होता है कि जिसे हम इनक्योरेबल कंसिडर करते हैं. तो एकदम प्रोलॉन्ग हो गया है, अगर एक्स्ट्रा ज्यादा हो गया है ब्रोंकाइटिस, तो इट गोज इनक्योरेबल. The next is tuberculosis, which is also called as TB. It is caused by bacterium called a rod-shaped bacteria generally called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. You can see here in the lungs there is an infection caused by the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and which we can see or which we can observe in an X-ray analysis. It is generally also known as a droplet infection. Now, what do you mean by, first of all, droplet infection? If any infected person or a patient sneezes or coughs or while talking releases saliva, so that may spread from person to person, right? And if like two persons are talking and one sneezes in front of other, then the other person may get infected because of the small droplets that has come out from the sneeze of the patient, right? Because it may contain TB bacteria. So generally it spreads from person to person. So it is called as droplet infection. It may be called as a contagious one. Contagious means the disease which spreads from person to person. The symptoms includes cough, weight loss, night sweats, fever, and the diagnosis is how one can diagnose by X-ray, and the treatment can be antibiotics, and yes, of course, it is curable. The last, which is often used in the genetics also, genetics में भी ये नाम आपको बार बार सुनाई देगा, because it is a hereditary disorders. It goes from one generation to another generation, and the name is cystic fibrosis. Now it affects the lungs as well as the digestive system, because it results into the production of excessive mucus. You can see here, excessive mucus is produced, right, which is thick and sticky, right? So that will generally, if in the lungs, let's say if lots of mucus is produced, it will clog the bronchi and bronchiole. So it will obstruct the pathway of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So the whatever the gaseous transport is taking place will be hurdle, and the body won't get enough amount of oxygen in the same way, right? So it may even obstruct the pancreas, because even mucus is released in the digestive system also. So ultimately it results into the difficulty in breathing. Of course it is incurable, and hence it is a chronic one. So cystic fibrosis is also a lung disease, which is a hereditary one that passes from one generation to another. So this was all about today's chapter, and in the next lecture, hopefully we'll start with the next chapter.